Today we talk about future trends in the visual effects industry with some of the leading thinkers in the field. Ken Museth, Freek Hoekstra, Paul Ambrosiussen, and Peter Claes. We talk about virtual production, AI, and Houdini. This is HIP TV. Nice to meet you. Thanks so much for agreeing to do this. First, we're going to go around and everyone's going to introduce themselves.
My name is Ken Museth. I'm a senior director at NVIDIA in simulation technology. Before that, I was head of simulation at Digital. I've been at SpaceX for 6 years, DD for a number of years, and 8 years at DreamWorks.
Hi, my name is Freek Hoekstra. I am originally a game developer and I now specialize in simulation for autonomous vehicles. Before this, I have been at Apple for 3.5 years working on Apple's Special Projects Group. And before that, I was at Electronic Arts and SideFX.
Hi, my name is Paul Ambrosiussen. I'm a technical artist at SideFX. I am currently working on game tools as part of SideFX Labs, and the purpose of that is to essentially wrap up common workflows that artists throughout the industry have and make it more accessible and therefore stimulate creativity. Just as a side note, today I'm representing myself, and any statements I make are not, statements made by SideFX.
Hi, my name is Peter Claes, and I'm currently working in games as an expert technical artist with at Activision, working on Call of Duty. And before that, I was effects supervisor at The Mill in Los Angeles, working on a variety of commercials and game cinematics. And then before that, I was at Method Studios, also effects supervisor, working on Marvel features and also some commercial work. So I just wanted to mention as a little disclaimer that all the statements I will say today are my own as well. They are my own opinion and not those of my employers.
So our first topic of conversation today is CG. What kind of tools and technology will future artists have to play with? I know that this is a huge topic, but I'd love to know what interests you the most, what excites you the most about the future and tools.
So in regards to tools, I think the trend is definitely going towards making things accessible and somewhat simple to interact with and going more towards a real time so that the amount of iterations that you can get out of the software is increasing. So I think anything that goes more towards real time, that goes, not too overly complex, or at least where the complexity can be abstracted away into more of a simpler interface, I think those kind of tools will survive and will thrive.
I agree with that. I also think that there's a focus on real time, but I also think that there are other trends. I think we'll see fewer proprietary tools at the big studios. I think pipelines will be more standardized. I think there will be more focus on coupling. When you look at simulation, there seems to be a trend to try and couple different types of simulations and sort of break down the traditional pipeline with character animation and effects, where you sort of put them together. I think there's also a trend to sort of decentralize. VFX in the cloud, I believe, is something we're going to see more of.
I agree with both of those. I think a good example of that is not just looking at tools, but at games as well. Really good example that everyone knows about is Minecraft, right? Minecraft gives the tools to create the games to the players, right? So you get emerging gameplay. And I think the same will happen with, content creation at a larger scale, not just at, smaller micro scale like Minecraft, but, such as tools like Houdini. They will have to become and will become more user-friendly, not just artist-friendly, but user-friendly as, user being a consumer, because then they can create their own experiences. And I think those are far more valuable than, pre-made pieces of entertainment that, big studios and game studios make and then give to, consumers to enjoy. I think people will create those and want to create those themselves.
I think I'd echo all three of those. Minecraft, I think, is a fantastic example of user-generated content. We obviously see lots of things with modding as well, but also, for example, PS4 are using Dreams, where they are using point splatting to render these beautiful worlds, which suddenly allows you to do a Minecraft-like experience, but with AAA graphics. And so people can make their own beautiful looking things. I think that's a big push. The other thing that I see coming in, which isn't quite there yet, is using lots of neural network systems to abstract and speed up certain tasks, whether it's creating simulations or making simulations real time, or whether it's to place things more quickly or based upon a learned distribution where people don't have to manually craft the rules to do something anymore. Basically, they can just give X number of examples and I want it to be like this. And then I think that's going to be a push in the future. That's probably more like 4 or 5 years out. But I think that's going to be a massive shift, almost as perhaps even bigger than sort of the shift from manual to procedural workflows.
To add to that, something that always sort of bothers me or interests me is, even since my job is making tools that allow, artists to create content faster, at the end of the day, the artist using those tools currently still needs to have, an artistic eye to create the content the way that, that it looks good. But a lot of people out there don't have that, right? They're not trained to do that. But if we want to create tools and software that allows people to create this art, somehow I think, if we can't teach these people, to have an artistic eye, how are these tools going to give people the ability to get that artistic eye? And like Freek says, some AI can definitely help with that.
So AI can help make something look good by all of the training data that you give it.
Right. I mean, I have the idea here, right? I just don't have the skills to get what's here onto my screen and show it to someone else, right?
I think that's actually exactly the same thing that we have with AI right now, right? Like, you have style transfer GANs where I can take my picture and I can make it look like the style of a specific painting. So why can I not do that in 3D? It's like, okay, well, I want kind of this layout, but I want it to look like this epic dungeon that I saw in Dark Souls, right? Like, that's the next step. And so how do I don't have the skills to create that ML system to do that, but when it exists, I'm extinct.
Because AI will be able to make a style based on all of the information that you fed it. I mean, that sounds like not so in the far future, right? Like,
I mean, the thing is that when we look at AI, and maybe Ken knows more about this working at NVIDIA, obviously they do a lot with this stuff, right? But a lot of AI work right now is in 2D space. So lots of image works because they're nice regularized grids. And so that seems to be hard to translate into 3D space, at least for polygons. When we're going into volumes, that's a little easier, and we're starting to see sort of the first volumetric AI work happening now. But I think in the future you could see really interesting things.
Yeah, I agree. It has some very interesting possibilities. I am especially interested in physics simulation, which of course also is a big part of Houdini. And there's a lot of promises there. Like there's a lot of techniques that are actually developed in engineering physics that we can apply. Things like, often when we do like volumetric simulations, right, we don't actually solve it to what's called convergence. Like we pick a fairly coarse grid and we solve like a fluid system or whatever. But because of our choice of grid points and also the time stepping, it actually means that we're not solving the equations correctly. That's just a fact. But systems like deep learning can actually be used to sort of model what happens at a scale that we're not capturing it. So what we can see is potentially more accurate simulations, and also faster, where we can get away with even coarser grids, even larger time steps. So I think there's some really interesting techniques, and some of that, of course, is exactly happening at NVIDIA right now.
I would actually be curious to hear your opinion about this. Like, what if you were to, for example, let's say you have ground truth data of, let's say, a real explosion or something, and it's a very complex phenomenon. We have equations that kind of describe it, but it's not perfect, right? could you, in your opinion, could you use ML to look at that real data and then do a more accurate simulation of, say, some CFD simulation of, say, controlled airflow across a model or something? Like, could you?
Absolutely. Yeah, you can. But it's a funny example you brought up, because explosions is actually something that I find very interesting, because I've worked on it both in an engineering context and then the VFX. And the type that when we say explosions in the context of movies, it's not an explosion because a real explosion is incredibly fast. It's very complicated, and it happens obviously in the blink of an eye, right? There's this propagation of a sound wave, and it propagates at the speed of sound. So you can't actually capture it in camera because everything just moves so fast. So if you were to do that, you would actually create something that didn't look like what you're trying to create. But what you can do, and that's, people have actually done that, like when you have stage explosions where you're actually igniting gasoline. So you have a primary detonation, you have aerated gasoline, and that just burns really fast, and it's called a deflagration as opposed to a detonation. And that you could totally throw deep learning after and try and capture. And it's actually it's a very interesting application, because oftentimes one of my favorite examples is actually from Educator. In one of the Ape movies, they had a massive explosion on stage using deflagration, and the director wasn't really happy with it. He actually wanted more, and Educator was trying then to augment it with CG fire onto the plate with a real fire, and it was very, very difficult to match the exact look, the flame temperature, and everything. So that's a case where if you can throw it through a DL network and sort of capture both the dynamics, but also the formation of soot and the temperature and stuff like that. That's really, really difficult to dial in if you're an artist, and it's sort of a one-off, so it doesn't really scale. So yeah.
I wanted to ask, does this mean that we're going to become more curators rather than artists? And like, will we just be doing the final touches because deep learning will be doing so much for us? What's the future of that?
I think there's going to be a lot of emphasis on layout, right? I mean, already we can kind of start seeing, whether it's in games or even in visual effects environments as well, or in the self-driving cars. There's just so much data there. There's just so much assets there. So to hand place that stuff is near impossible. So proceduralism can get you pretty far, I think, rule-based. But even then, there's going to be scenarios whereby you still need to scale and scale. And so if you were to be able to take a picture of an environment and then have an AI learn about what this environment looks like from a three-dimensional scene point of view, not a two-dimensional image recognition, but three-dimensionally truly extract a 3D scene out of that, and then start populating that scene with assets. Well, now we can kind of start to say, okay, now change this entire ecosystem from, say, sunny to snowy, and swap out plants, make it in a different style, take cartoon-looking assets, as long as we kind of have a library of data. And that works in two ways. One is to populate the layout, and the second part, I think, is to make that library of data in the first place. Because the understanding of a three-dimensional model is not necessarily an easy thing for an AI, at least not at the moment. So I think, as Freek mentioned earlier, volumetric data recognition, that kind of thing, that's going to happen more. Scanning of data, but not just scanning of data, but also patching holes in the data that is being scanned. So extrapolating from existing data and then just closing the holes. Things that maybe traditionally would have been done by an artist that is kind of painstakingly going through. I think those kind of asset generation based off of scanned data, or based off of could be a 2D picture that has been taken, or could be an image sequence, right? If somebody has an iPhone, and these days the top level iPhones or other phones have got scanners on them, they've got, they blast point clouds into a scene, and so now you've got depth to it as well. So those kind of things, I think, are going to definitely have a big impact.
I mean, just to echo that, the reason I am in the vehicle simulation space is because this is where a lot of that development is happening right now, right? Like we are learning to understand the world from point clouds and cameras and radar and ultrasound and all these different sensors, and then putting that data together and deciding, is this a car? Yes, no. Is this a pedestrian? Yes, no. And I think once you get, like, basically that knowledge is great. Like, okay, you know, we've currently reached, is this a hot dog level? If you've seen Silicon Valley, but I mean, fundamentally, right, at a certain point, you need to get so good at this that you understand what everything is, right? Like you can't just know, oh, this is a car. You need to also know what is not a car. Well, what is that then? Okay, well, that's a tree. Okay, well, or let's say something blows across the street, right? You need to be able to understand is, should I avoid this object because it's hard and it will wreck my car? Or is it safer to keep going? There is infinite amount of objects that could blow across the street. So you need to look at the thing, make a decision about how hard this thing is, and then do stuff. So anyway, to bring that back to sort of the art context, is I think this is the fundamental basis of computers learning to understand the world around us. And once they do, you can start using that knowledge to sort of generate almost anything. And I think it's actually sort of a two-way coupling, like a generative adversarial network. The more we learn about the world, the more we can do with that knowledge. The more we can do with that knowledge, the better training data we can make, the better predictions we can make about the world, and it builds upon itself.
And Paul, I mean, back to with this idea of like show Houdini a photo and then build like a living room, and then boom, the living room is made. You have in 3D, and then adding Alexa to that. Houdini, make me a living room based on the images I sent you last week. Do you see that in Houdini's future?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's already being done, right? I mean, you have Promethean AI doing exactly that, where they're building a system where you essentially just describe by using your voice what it is you want to see, and it builds a virtual space of exactly that. So that's something that is definitely going to happen for Houdini and for other softwares out there, right? It's going to be tool agnostic.
But to limit some of that complexity, right? Because, like what Freek is saying, how do you build the entire world? Well, maybe we don't need to build the entire world. And I know that some of the tools that you've developed, they take a certain style of pattern, subsection of a pattern in, and based off of that, it generates a whole, bigger grid of new similar patterns. So, I mean, now make the pattern a little bit more complex than a few pixels, right? And use machine learning to have a better understanding of your complex pattern. You're still not building the entire world. You don't necessarily need to. So I think that will be a more intermediate stepping stone to get to complex environments that are manageable for artists and VFX, maybe even simulation or games, right?
Yeah, and you don't need to generate the whole world, right? Because since we're talking about all of this in the context of art and experiences for users, how long is someone going to want to experience something, right? They're not going to sit in a simulation for days, right? It's more in the likes of hours, right? So you don't have to generate the whole world. You have to generate the parts that are most interesting about the world, or fictitious worlds.
So you asked essentially, how can deep learning change potentially Houdini? I'd actually like to flip it around and say, how can Houdini potentially change DL? And I think it can. I think this is something that it goes beyond Houdini. It actually speaks to simulation as a whole. It's sort of this in the same sort of category of experience that you talked about, Freek. So you can totally use simulation systems to essentially create the training sets that you need to teach deep learning networks. So if you can simulate physics, you can create these virtual worlds that are typically much more safe. And then you can do the unit testing you were talking about. You can teach robots, and you can actually train networks that you can then use in real-time inference to sort of create user experience, let's say, inside Houdini. So I think it's very symbiotic. It's not it's not just one way. I think actually simulation as a whole has a huge role to play in sort of promoting deep learning.
I think the combination of physics with layout was just an awesome move. When they first introduced that with Solaris, was like, okay, this is cool. And I think the other bit that I also like a lot, which is more, okay, now you've got one, I'm gonna call it player or artist or something, because I really think we're going to go towards a collaborative, creative environment. I think, I mean, Ken, hopefully you can talk about the Omniverse bit, that NVIDIA is doing, because I believe in that. I think where you can use dynamics to start placing objects around the scene. You can have multiple users in one scene start to collaborate together and work iteratively, fast, in real time together. Have a third user that is then sort of more the director, the spectator, which then sort of ties into virtual production and starting to have a director really put a camera and curate not just the content, but the experience, right? It's like, what do you feel? What is the pacing? What is the story? What's the narrative that's being told? And so I think, there are AIs that are able to start doing stories and writing and music. That all starts to exist, which is exciting. But at the same time, I think a human connects with another human based off of a story or an emotion or an experience. And so any tools that can help with creating that experience faster, right? And sure, there's artistry involved and curating these collaborative scenes together. Any of those kind of tools, I think, will be successful.
Do you think we'll get an AI version of Clippy, helping you sort of create experiences?
It's not called Clippy, it's called Siri or Alexa.
That's what I was going to ask. Like, you have a collaborative scene, everyone's working in real time, the response is in real time, and then also you have Houdini could be, the other worker placing things for you in the scene as you're working.
To some extent, it comes down to sort of more a hierarchy of command, right? If you're on a film set, there is somebody in charge, right? And there's a production manager, and there's a director, and there's somebody in light, somebody in sound. Like all these people are working together. So in virtual production, same thing, right? All these elements need to come together to build that experience. Now, who is going to do all those roles? Well, maybe it's specialists, maybe it's AI augmented specialists, or maybe it's players. Maybe it's a Minecraft environment, right? And then you get into the Machina world, whereby people are doing, movies with currently game engines, right? But yeah.
Will we be using VR headsets and Houdini, walking around the space with tilt brush and, making things that way?
I'd hope so. I think, if you've played with I forgot the name of the thing, but the Google VR Paint thing, it's so much fun. It's just like, if you've never experienced it, it's even hard to describe that experience, I find, at least, because you can walk through your painting, you walk into it. And I think if you can walk into your simulation, you can redirect your emitter. You can use your hands, right? And not a tablet or a mouse anymore, but you have gloves, or it captures your entire full body IK skeleton, and you interact with the world in that way. It just, again, mind blown, right? Your interface and your experience, you're really submerging yourself into your own digital world. So to that extent, I think, I don't know who said it, was Paul or Freek or somebody else, where it's like, oh, you're not going to be necessarily, days spending in that world. I'm not so sure. I think if it reaches the point of immersion where people really start to, are like, if I'm in the zone when I'm making art, time just goes by, right? It's like 2-3 hours, a block is gone. Obviously you have your needs, you gotta eat, you gotta sleep, but I can see that you go into your VR world, and as a creator, you're maybe a curator, a creator, and a different kind of artist. You're maybe an entertainer. You're like a Bob Ross in VR, right?
But that's for you as a content creator, right? At the end of the day, you're doing it for someone out there to enjoy. So like we've discussed before, those tools will have to become as accessible as possible to that group of people. And so I would agree, yes, VR definitely is. It might not be using the medium VR, right, where you're using a headset. It might be through some other way, because headsets do have problems. But using, for example, Unreal Engine with VR, being able to place objects, scale them, or move them around, it really is a different experience than just looking at a screen and placing it. Because you're there, you can really see, the how things are relative to each other because you experience it. You're not just looking at it.
I think fundamentally, right, like the VR, whether it's in VR or whether it's not in VR, I don't think it really matters that much. And I think fundamentally also the question about, oh, do you change things through your voice? Like personally, I'm not that excited about, oh, make me a room, because I think that's a very coarse input, right? I would much rather, like when we're trying to illustrate ideas, what do? We draw, right? Like I try and draw the idea, I try and create some sort of basic input, and then the person's mind extrapolates from that drawing what it is. And I think that's what VR does well, is because we are no longer doing this sort of, distanced input with a keyboard and a mouse. We're starting to be a more direct input. It's almost like, when you're sculpting real clay, you can use all your fingers at once. You're feeling it. And I think that's the real fundamental issue that we have a lot of the time is just, this keyboard and mouse. Like, I mean, it's a very crude input device. And so if you could say, okay, well, I want an emitter and it's this shape, right? Like, and I can sort of just sculpt it in the air where I can control the shape, where I could say, okay, well, the explosion goes this way and then boom, this way, right? Like if I can orchestrate things by just moving them and having the timing of that I'm currently putting in, like, I think that's where a lot of speed can come from, because the input methods are more rich.
With the way that it is currently with training data and deep learning, you have to feed it a lot of input. But what about AI making certain decisions where it's able to discern interest? Can it have an aha moment and go beyond just like, do I recognize this, and replicate that?
You can definitely, imagine a scenario where there is a deep learning network sort of sitting in the background and learning about essentially the user, in this case an artist. Like they can actually make suggestions for networks. It can have can warm start a creative decision and say, well, my experience is that you tend to like this type of design, this type of model, this type of, there are many things that we do that we don't actually realize, choices that are very unique to us. It's like, when you go on Amazon and you shop around, right? Amazon is actually analyzing everything you do, and there is deep learning going on behind. So when it suggests something, that is based on your past pattern, and you can definitely use the same techniques in a UI sort of interface where you learn about a user, or maybe a studio, or maybe something that's characteristic to a particular show, or you totally can. I know I've heard of studios that do the same thing, where they analyze usage of render queues. They try to figure out like why is certain shows like hammering on the GPU or the CPU. What's going on? Is there something that we can learn about the setup that maybe there's something wrong, or maybe this is actually something we could have predicted, so we can schedule better. Or there are many places where you can sort of inject AI, and it's not evil, it's just trying to help you.
That's actually super interesting, like taking the deep learning and turning it onto the artists and their behavior, and the studio's behavior, and the computer's behavior.
It's actually a really good point that AIs are both global and personalized, right? Like what Amazon does really well is it learns your behavior, and then it also suggests other people who ordered this also ordered this. And usually these suggestions are meh, right? But you can imagine in the future where they get better. And it could be really interesting to sort of have this thing where the software gets optimized for you. As you use it more, the software learns, oh, these are the tools you use a lot, so I'm gonna make your own personalized shelf like most used tools or something. Like, I mean, that's a really basic thing.
That's a really novel idea. I built exactly that in Houdini using TensorFlow. But here's the catch, right? The data that I had very much was biased towards technical users. So it would constantly try and suggest wrangles, which obviously can do anything. But for you're going to need a huge amount of data, or make it very customized to this one individual and analyze their behavior and just use that. So
the problem is I wouldn't necessarily want it to be customized to myself, because as Freek was saying, I want to learn from the best users out there. So maybe I want to see, oh, hey, what is Matt Estella's next layer of suggested nodes? Or you toggle on a few of the top Houdini users that you're aware of, analyze those people, and then, all right, these are their suggestions. Why are they using this or that? I think that would be valuable.
So let's talk a little bit about industry. Where do you see film, game, and other CG industries headed? You were talking about real-time virtual production, Peter.
Yeah, I mean, part of that is also just the current situation in the world. It's not really a choice, it's
right.
It's that or nothing, right? So if that's your choice, then you're gonna go with virtual production. It's more a practical nature. But on the other hand, from a cost savings point of view as well, I mean, you're no longer dealing with green screens. It's a virtual screen around you. So no green screens means no roto, right? So that means no outsourcing potentially. So you want to do a different take, well, you're retaking something is totally fine. You're not going to lose magic hour, because your magic hour is now infinite, right? So you can just dial the perfect environment and you can do it again and again and again. And just from that point of view, that already provides huge value for films. I think there is something to be said for tying the environment in with it. Like, it is limited up to, like, you're not going to be able to have necessarily actors swim in a virtual environment. That just doesn't lend itself well to that environment.
That's not true.
I mean, you can do
I've seen it.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I mean, then...
I can't tell you where, but I've seen it.
Well, yeah, I know what's coming from Weta too, that's true.
Oh,
so,
okay.
yeah, that is true. Yes, I stand corrected. So, but that is less common, right? I mean, I would think that for smaller shoots as well, right? I mean, for commercial, I mean, we're talking about film. So I think virtual production is huge for that. But also in terms of the stuff that was done before, The Lion King was awesome, whereby even though the entire movie is pretty much virtual, but the camera work is done with real cameras driving virtual cameras. So the rigs were familiar to camera operators. So I think those kind of traditional skills and artistic eye and of the DOP and all that is just going to go into virtual production more and more. Also, here's another beauty of it. Your virtual set could potentially be partially in VR, whereby somebody doesn't necessarily need to even be in the same country or location anymore. Like, your director might be even on a flight. If he's got good internet connection, low latency, well, there you go, right? It's like he is on set. He's still productive, he's still working, even if he's flying across to a different country.
I completely agree. So you did name dropping at some point. I sort of feel I have obligation to follow up. So Omniverse, which is this collaborative framework that NVIDIA is working on, and I think we're talking about it. It's actually a product. Is actually striving to exactly do that. Collaborate over distance. Also have sort of a uniform pipeline where you can actually hook up all kinds of DCCs, of course, including Houdini. And everything is in the cloud. It's decentralized, and that type of experience is actually one of the targets. We have working prototypes, but I completely agree. I think this is absolutely a trend. I think actually, you can already see big productions that are going in that direction, like the Avatar sequels have that. And I think the interesting question would be like, what does it mean for Houdini, right? I think one of the things that was asked for a lot for the avatars is exactly where are my effects? Like, I want my effects on the virtual stage, and I want it to be real time. I want the explosion to be embedded with the mocap. That's really hard. It's a very difficult problem. But I think Houdini and other DCCs and Omniverse, they really need to step up. This is something that we need to solve. We need to be able to have interactive simulation. and it's not going to be easy. Partly because of, well, it's, you know, these types of simulations are slow, but you're also expecting interaction, and that's very difficult.
So Ken, do you see, for instance, I mean, I'm obviously coming from the games point of view a little bit, but with the new generation of hardware coming, right, whether it's, you know, also Unreal Engine 5 and the PlayStation 5 and, you know, the new Xbox as well, that kind of level of computational power, whereby we can slowly start to do you know, grid-based simulations on the GPU on the fly, right? And they don't necessarily need to be, you know, they can be fairly sparse grids, but there's, you know, still there's the directability, and also then, you know, you can crank up your particle count as long as the underlying grid is somewhat low res. So then, do you think that is a good sort of compromise for now?
Yeah, no. So it's funny because I also come from, not personally, but there's obviously a lot of game technology at NVIDIA, and a lot of the physics simulations are actually based on game engines, like PhysX is part of the Omniverse. But I think the gap between, you know, what we traditionally call game engines and what you will find in, say, Houdini, like, so these very high quality, you know, photoreal simulations, that gap is going to close rapidly, and it's coming from both ends. You know, I definitely see game engines stepping up and getting more and more photoreal, and I hope Houdini will move in the other direction too. And I think you're absolutely right. It's a huge challenge, right? It's a challenge both in terms of computation. I think acceleration, you know, GPUs is definitely playing a big role. AI is also playing a big role. And the fact that you can put it in the cloud also means that you're no longer limited by, you know, how many graphics cards can I put under my disk, right? If you have this sort of virtual compute service, you don't really care if it's running a 1, 2, or 3 graphics cards. All you care about is what's the turnaround time. And there are attempts to try and take some of these technologies and accelerate them. But as you're indicating, it's a very tough problem. But I think that's inevitable. It is going in that direction.
For me personally, it's one of the reasons why I switched from you know, features and advertising into games. Those exact problems, because right. I think it's like that convergence that is the exciting bit of the future. That's where a lot of the pioneering work is happening. So a lot of exciting problems to solve. So yeah.
I completely agree.
I think I had the same thing, and just to sort of touch on what Peter was saying, I think it's a perfect example of having all these different people coming in from the internet working on the same problem, but still having the cameraman there. Why? Because there's something about someone moving a real physical camera that makes it different from someone making a spline in Houdini and moving a camera along, right? There's something about that feels real and in that world. But now you can start doing things. You can multiply his movement ×2, so he can make a bigger move than he could do in the real world. Like you have sort of the power of both, which is super cool.
It's also, I think, you know, a camera operator, or I mean, even placing dynamic simulations, let's say that's already too hard, right? Go with like what Snapchat and Facebook are doing, right? They create a digital environment and now make it as easy as this is your phone and this is where your viewfinder is, and that's it. And now you're scaling, right? Now it's millions, if not billions, of people that are participating in this shared environment. But yeah.
I think it is actually a really good point as well, though, that to say sort of like we see game engines rapidly approach visual quality that is so photoreal that the majority of people cannot distinguish them from reality. Like if you've seen the Unreal 5 demo, it looks phenomenal, right? Like that, I've seen movies from 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago that are about at that quality, maybe even below it. And that's running at 30 frames per second on a $500 piece of hardware in real time. That's awesome. Great. Problem with that is to make that demo took a long time. And so this is where Houdini comes in, and this is where other programs come in, right? Like we need Houdini to basically sort of plug into these things and be quicker about it. And obviously you guys have done cool stuff with the Houdini engine, and there's a lot of stuff coming there. But I think there's the issue of solving equations really, really fast to make things look good, which is what game engines are getting very good at. but they're not very good at the actual content creation aspect of generate me, a city, which is, for example, what Houdini is very good at.
But I think to add to the point of, where does Houdini fit into the picture of creating content at real time? I think very much, yes, it will be sort of directing all of the different things, like creating the layout, creating the content, or even using external content to do these kind of things, right? Because, for example, the Unreal Engine 5 demo, if you look on ArtStation, you'll see that a lot of the stuff that was made there is either scans from Megascans, right? Or they are things that are generated in place with Houdini. It's a fairly small team that built that demo, but it's extremely impressive. So it shows how much future next-gen tech relies on the tools becoming faster, more iterative, higher quality, and just more processing power in general.
Working from home, you mentioned virtual production, and we're in it right now with COVID. Where do you think this is going? Do you think we're going to go back to the studios, or do you think there's going to be a hybrid?
I think the true cost of this is yet to be seen. It's very different from walking up to somebody's desk and just, having a brainstorming session and what that leads to, right? Or the happy accidents when you bump into somebody in the kitchen and you start talking about what you did on your weekend, and somehow that leads to, whatever new idea that you have. And that does happen. So that serendipity, I don't know. From a practical point of view, if you have a good workstation and a work environment, and generally a company that cares about their employees will set them up correctly, the practical day-to-day tasks, I think, is fine. I think it's the higher level brainstorming and those kind of collaborative sessions, at least personally, I sometimes miss that. I will seek that out with currently on Zoom, but it's definitely harder.
Right.
I think it depends on the type of work that you do, right? If you're more in a creative environment, then yes, it definitely matters more than if you are working at, let's say you do some financial things where it's all about the numbers and not a whole lot of creativity. If there's anyone with a lot of financial experience in that kind of job, they'll prove me wrong, but that's at least my assumption. The other thing that really interests me and something that I thought about recently is I enjoy working from home a lot. I think it opens and should open a lot more doors for people to work part-time for companies, where Monday through Wednesday I work for company X, and then the other 2 days I work for another company. I think that would open up a lot of doors, not just for individual levels, but also for companies, right, where they need some sort of expertise, but that's extremely expensive to get someone like that to work full-time. But having them, jump in once a week is a lot more affordable. I think then you might get into freelancing, but something like that definitely I see a lot of value.
I agree, but I think the real challenge is sort of the knowledge transfer, right? I think this is going to hit junior people harder than senior people. Like if you show up and you're already an expert, you'll probably do fine. But if you come up and you're actually you really need to sort of educate yourself. You need to absorb from your colleagues. You're cut off, and you're really reliant on that. That weekly or daily Zoom meeting you have. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it's going to cut it. I'm very concerned about junior people that start off. I mean, I have a son that's studying CS at Berkeley, and he's smart, but he's struggling because it's a very different experience. He's very extroverted, so it's hard. It's really hard.
One, I think it's going to be very interesting to see the longer term effects of this in terms of new companies starting, because right now we're dealing mostly with companies that have already existed, and people are moving between these companies. So it's fairly easy to train people that join rather than having to train an entire company that you build from the ground up. I think that's going to be a really interesting thing to see. The other thing, more specifically to me, one huge benefit that I've seen due to the pandemic is the access to communication, because I work, in Los Angeles, and all of R&D and whatever else, for SideFX is all in Toronto. Oftentimes before the pandemic, they have meetings and obviously have face-to-face conversations with each other to talk about things. I have no way to access that. I have no way to participate in those conversations. But now, because everyone is remote and they have to talk digitally, I can participate in those conversations. So I can add my thoughts and my opinions to that. Whether or not they're liked or not, it's a different story, but at least I'm able to participate, right?
We're just about out of time. I just wanted to ask one more question, and it's, I think, an important one for the listeners, which is which jobs might be obsolete in the future and which ones would be in demand?
So if I were to start, I think there's a couple things that are going to be more important. And so I think more technical jobs are better. I know that might not be necessarily what artists like to hear. I used to think the same. It's okay, you'll get over it. Don't worry. Scripting is not that scary. You just gotta bite through the sour apple, okay? You just gotta get through it. But I think technical jobs will always remain. Jobs like Roto, gonna go away. I think jobs like understanding creating shaders, learning real-time game engines, learning procedural content generation, probably simulation as well. I think those jobs are going to be safe for quite a while. And I think their demand is going to peak in probably 3 to 5 years. After that, it's harder to say, but I think that would be my guess.
On the other hand, just to be a little bit play devil's advocate, I can see still an enormous demand or a huge demand for people that are highly skilled at an artistic skill, such as ZBrushing. ZBrushing and making sculpts of creatures or things like that, that is a skill, that is an artistic skill that, I mean, maybe an AI can do that, but I don't think so, because it's very specific to what a director's vision is and also what the artist's skill is. I mean, think if you go to a museum these days, you look at, whether it's clay or it's marble sculptures that people have done, thousands of years ago. These things lasted. Why? Because these people are extremely talented and good at what they did. So being the best at what you do in an artistic role, I think there is still a demand for that. But the problem with that is that's a pyramid, right? In the sense that there's a lot of people that want to do it, and there's only a couple of jobs out there. So I think that's going to be very competitive, and then it's kind of like winner takes all. So the people at the top that are extremely talented at doing that, well, they're going to take it. And so I think that is where, beginning artists should be aware of that. If they're going to go into that, they either have to work at it and have talent at it and, just be 100% sure that is what they want to do. Otherwise, indeed, having diversification in your skill set with scripting and other things will help. Somebody told me once that it's kind of like, if you want to be successful with a startup or a company these days, it's basically, the formula is simple. It's AI plus X equals success. So that AI portion, right, that understanding of digital, look at how much time we talked about machine learning and deep learning. So any understanding of that, right, and understanding of the libraries and the modules and whatever's involved with that will definitely, be, I think, at least, it'll guarantee you a successful career in the future, in the near future, and probably, for the next 10, 20, 30 years. I don't see machine learning is kind of like, it's Pandora's box, right? It's basically, people were poking at it like, 20 years ago, but the computational resources weren't really available to do it then. Now we do. So now the cat is out of the box, and it's kind of like, well, now we need people with those skills to be able to implement systems and help reduce that complexity, so that, maybe the artists can then also come in and help build, AI assisted pieces of art.
But please don't try and do everything. Pick a subset of things and do that really well. Because I often see, students on forums and whatever asking, I've done all this, what else do I have to do? No, pick a few of those that you really enjoy and do that really well. I think it's a more important thing than trying to figure out what jobs are going to remain in a couple of years. Do something really well. Experience, in something is always in demand.
Yeah, that's totally true.
At the same time, I wouldn't necessarily want to specialize and become a really great roto artist or a great camera cracker.
No.
Right? Because those things, those things that can get automated by machines will get automated by machines.
Yeah, I think rather than trying to predict what will be obsolete, I think I would recommend sort of, instead of being a one-trick circus horse, I think if you are able to pick two things, let's say you're able to pull off a really solid physics sim, but you also know how to do creature simulation, that would be a very, very sought after person at, say, a place like Weta, because they're trying to cobble everything, right? So they were struggling to find people. They had plenty of people that were very, very good creature artists or TDs, and the same with effects. But finding someone that can do both, that's very hard. So if you can pull that off, you have job security.
Well, thanks guys so much. I mean, I think I asked all my questions that I wanted to, and I think I got some good gems, you guys. So this was really super interesting. I hope you enjoyed it.